So I want you all to know that there's never a moment where I forget that I'm black. There's never a moment where comments like, that thing that you do, you? Yeah, your people, that rhythmic thing that you do. Okay? And you're so articulate. Like, what do those things mean? All those I've heard right there after coming down off of stage. So I want to have a conversation with you today about tolerance. Tolerance is one of the most misused words today. I took a survey of how people define tolerance. The most interesting thing I found is that it depends on who you ask, where you ask them, when you ask them, who else is around when you ask them, and the answer will vary. So what I found is that tolerance is a very subjective term. So my survey yielded a few questions. Questions like, what is tolerance? Are differences in people such as race, gender, ethnicity supposed to just be tolerated? And most importantly, how do we move past tolerance? So let's start by discussing the diversity of our own city, Austin, Texas. Austin is the 11th largest city and currently the fastest growing city in the United States. In the past 2 years, there's been roughly 141,000 people added to our city, bringing the entire metro area to a little bit over 2 million. So within that, we have to discuss different diversity, such as ethnicity, religious, sexual preference, to start with a few, for us to truly have a conversation about tolerance. See, the city of Austin has now crossed the majority-minority threshold. What that means is that the Anglo meaning white, non-Hispanic, has dropped below the 50% marker with no foreseeable rise in the future. It's not that they're not growing, it's just that Asian and Hispanic households have outpaced them in growth in our city. 59% of the total population of Austin claims some kind of religious affiliation. So what that means is roughly 41% are unchurched. Of that 41%, the majority is the millennial generation. That's 18 to 32 years of age. You know, that generation that's coined phrases like, no church in a while, and no religion is a new religion. So we also have to discuss that Austin is the third highest populated city for the LGBT community at 5.3%. So I want you to take a moment and think about the circles you move in. How many of your closest friends are different from you? When I say different, I don't mean kale versus spinach or gym versus yoga. I mean fundamentally in their soul believe something different than you do. Take a moment and think. So now let's branch out. How often do you have contact with people who are different than you? How often can you name someone who, believes something completely different than you do? So in a conversation about tolerance, I attempted to dig into what it was based in. My first stop was ignorance. See, ignorance today is a word we often use, but has a much less deadly definition than the dreadful connotation that we attach to it. Webster simply defines it as a lack of knowledge or information. We all, however, use a phrase or two such as ignorance is bliss to start. It's a phrase coined by an 18th century poem by Thomas Gray that says, no more where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Folly being foolishness, at least according to most of the book of Proverbs. So if folly is a lack of good sense and ignorance is foolish, why do we prescribe to it so regularly? Why do we teach our children who aren't innately born with this trait? See, ignorance is learned behavior. Children are not students, but they are surveyors of action. So as a parent, you've now become a purveyor of truth for not just your child, but every child that they come in contact with. There are over 34,000 homes with children under the age of 18 in Austin, which means that there are over 34,000 opportunities to exist the blurred line of ignorance permanently. So my next step in this journey was intolerance. Intolerance being the opposite side of tolerance exists, but what exactly does it look like? Does it look like a young white kid shooting unarmed black people in church? Does it look like a black man unloading a semi-automatic weapon into a crowd of police? Does it look like kneeling at the national anthem? Does it look like stopping flights and building a wall to keep out the illegals? But the real question is, what does intolerance mean to you? What does intolerance feel like to you when you think about it? The news has flooded us with this information, but we can no longer hide. So the real question here is, What does it look like to you? See, intolerance is perpetuated when we have this black versus white, or you with us or against us thinking. It's a dual mindset. Whenever we ask the question, we automatically go to either in or out, black or white, right or wrong, good or bad. When we give a person or a title, a person or a group a title of bad, it's easier to demonize them. And when we demonize people, we dehumanize them. And when they're dehumanized, they become marginalized. And we marginalize people because it's easier to create that space, giving us a title of us and them a title of them. But see, these things are nothing new. Even in Romans, Paul wrote, "Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before their own master that they fall or stand." So, why is it okay to tell people how to live their lives? Whose job did it become to impose upon them a glass ceiling to which they have to prove that they're worthy to rise above? Like they don't have the right to live where we live, work where we work, or even worship where we worship. That they aren't worthy to follow the same Jesus that embraced us at our lowest point, the same Jesus that reached out his hand to us when we were losing a fighting battle to sin. See, these thought patterns have surfaced, such as them out there versus us in here. Thought patterns like, we don't dislike them, but we'd rather not associate with them. When did people become the axis upon which the world of tolerance of other people spins? Wasn't it Jesus who said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone"? So, how do we confront topics that will need to be discussed in the church for having conversations with the unchurched? Topics such as racism, sexism, and classism. Right now, humanity is at war with itself. And every war that has ever been started is because on both sides they're fighting for pride disguised as love. Pride in their people, pride in their home, pride in their God. At the same time, fueling that fight is the certainty that the other side is motivated by hate. See, each side thinks that their principles and their beliefs are based in benevolence. Each side thinks that those people out there are evil and out to get us. The church cannot continue to remain silent on these issues, but is acknowledging them enough. One thing is for sure, that the church cannot progress with an asymmetrical ideology. The inability to speak on such a weighty topic is being communicated to people as indifference. Elie Wiesel said, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference." So, what indifference does is keep our vantage points limited, and it keeps a false sense of security. So my last, and I believe my most important question is, how do we move past tolerance? See, Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. I'd like to echo Paul's sentiment here in that love is the only way we can start to tear down this invisible yet seemingly impenetrable wall of tolerance. See, the answer to tolerance is acceptance. One survey responded saying, tolerance is the shadow side of belonging. It's acceptance void of love. A person can get by being tolerated, but will only truly thrive when we feel that we fully belong. See, we can tolerate people we don't love, but we can't truly accept others without loving them. So if we would simply stop, have a conversation with an open mind, listen to what they have to say, ask open-ended questions, we might just learn the motivation behind the actions of those that are simply being watched and condemned. If we would speak respectfully to everyone we encountered, we could begin to build a bridge to close the gap, because Proverbs says, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. What would happen if we stopped and listened with an open heart and an open mind? For starters, we would grow in empathy and compassion, because without these things, it will be impossible to tell people who've been hurt by the church that the church is where they'll find healing. The cast aside and shut down because of their belief are walking through the church doors every Sunday with a simple desire to ask questions. In any relationship where there's been abuse, there will be some semblance of fear at the prospect of having to trust again. And if these are the people Jesus gravitated to, should people just be tolerated? Should any of us just tolerate anyone else? All people were good enough for Jesus, and all people should be good enough for us to engage openly, sit down, have that conversation with, and just listen. because the only real way to move past tolerance is love. Tolerance may have its place to bring people in the doors of our building representing the church, but true acceptance founded in love is the only way to open the hearts of those people, having them become the church. Birthing a desire to carry the torch, giving true credibility to the foundational cornerstone that Gateway Church is built upon. No perfect people allowed. In order for us to bring life and freedom to every people group we touch, we have to first legitimize them as people through validation and affirm the positivity and the culture that they represent. This will allow us to build a bridge for not just us, but allow all to follow in our footsteps to cross over from tolerance to acceptance. So tolerance is one of the most misused words today. So I suggest we stop using it.